Welcome to Red Carpet Healthcare Solutions, hosted by Dr. Ryan Morley and Travis Bozell. Join us on this journey as we educate the patient population, inform today's medical providers, and inspire tomorrow's medical leaders through education and in-depth discussions. We can all discover today's best healthcare solutions. Now, sit back and enjoy Red Carpet Healthcare Solutions Private Practice Podcasters.
What would you say are the top 3 keys to being successful in private practice?
Well, I say there are 3 things that you as a physician need to do for your practice to thrive. And this may be a cliche to many of you, but when I said to Dr. Mallory after my first year of practice there, I was flabbergasted. Here I was, first year of practice, doing almost 500 total joints. That's a big volume back in the day of 86, right? And I looked at him and I said, Dr. Mallory, how do we know the patients will be there next year? Because that's the biggest concern you have. Will I have the patients? So you have to evaluate each opportunity you are looking at to see what is their patient profile, how are they attracting their patients, and how busy are all the partners? And so when Mallory looked at me, he said, Adolph, you take good care of patients. He also said this to me, which is very important. He said, you can be one of 2 types of surgeons and have 1 of 2 types of practice. You can be a low volume surgeon, surround yourself with just a few people. You won't need a large staff. You can do a low volume of surgery. Or you can be a high volume surgeon and surround yourself with a larger staff because you are the surgeon. You can do everything from, clean the floors, set the stage, do whatever it is you want to do to the operation, which is key and vital, right? So if you take good care of your patients become your spokesperson. In office today, I can't tell you every patient, not every, but 99% of them said something about the person who sent them. I have a practice that's grown on patient referral, not physician referral. So if you are an interactive personality, I laughed, I joked with my patients today, I hugged some patients today. I think that sets up the first premise, take good care of your patients. The second point is research. Research is key. And I'm not talking about going out and doing, experimental. I'm talking clinical research. I'm talking about knowing how well you're taking care of your patients. I'm talking about you assessing how the patients are doing, what your results are, what techniques you're using. It's paramount that we do what is state of the art, that we base our care and treatment on current medical recommendations, not just on the surgical perspective, but also on the medical perspective. And then I think the final thing that Mallory taught me was education. And we educate on multiple levels, right? We educate the patient, the family. We educate our colleagues around us, be they residents or just be they our partners. And then we go out and we educate in multiple educational forums. So those are the 3 basic tenets of establishing a good practice. But that also means you have to surround yourself with people who help you do what you need to get done. Remember, you're the surgeon. You need to be on top of everything that's happening, but you need to have sophisticated people who can run the business and help you run the business, because it is a business and you have to make business decisions. If you are all of a sudden incorporating something into your practice that has very soft data and isn't really getting you the next level and you're losing money on it, it doesn't make a difference if you do more. The more you do, the more you lose. So just doing volume doesn't help. And so I look at everything you try to incorporate in your practice and make sure before you do that, you see what is the benefit to my patient, what's the value proposition to my practice. in my practice, I am responsible for the livelihood of many individuals, right? Everyone who's on that JIS team is dependent on me and my colleagues bringing in the surgical volume, seeing the patients, to create the finances to keep everyone's paychecks coming, right? And so we not only have a responsibility to our patients, we have a responsibility to ourselves and our staff. And I think if you try to surround yourself with good people, private practice makes sense.
But yeah, so day one, I'll tell you exactly what I did day one. So day one, I get my bag, I got out all my stuff that I carry around, and I'm like, all right, well, what am I going to do? I'm like, all right, well, there's this hotel. It's not the Broadmoor. There's another one called the Antlers, which is like also very nice. And I'm like, oh, this will be great. They'll be like, someone gets hurt, I can come see somebody there. And like, so I call them and I go there, and like, man, they just wanted me to leave. They're like, who is this guy in the lobby? I gave them a bunch of cards. I'm sure they threw them in the garbage. So that was like day one. And I come home and I'm like, well, that was terrible. I'm like, well, that's not the way to do it. That's not the way to do it. I mean, I have nothing to go on, So
There's
then
no
like, all
manual
right,
for this.
day two, I'm like, all right, let me try CrossFit gyms, right? Those guys always get hurt. So I go see some CrossFit gyms. I meet some of the owners of CrossFit gyms, and like, they're super nice and they're super cool. And then I realized that I'm not going to get any referrals from them, because for CrossFitters, all I'm going to do is tell them not to do CrossFit, and that's bad. So, I was like, all right, that didn't work. And then over time, like with enough of that and networking and everything, I've sort of figured out like, okay, this person actually refers to me. And then like, all right, this person actually refers to me. Now I have a very good sense of like who actually refers patients and who doesn't. And over time, I've leaned into those things, and that's how I've gotten my referral going. I mean, I've also had some search engine optimization. There's a whole chunk of people that find me. But the more good work I do over a longer period of time, it's more word of mouth marketing. Well,
Amen.
Word of mouth marketing, while being slower than anything else, it's free and the most effective if you can wait it out.
Yeah, when I first started private practice right out of fellowship in 2011, I was in Metro Detroit, and I had 3 partners. I was not a partner. I was an employed physician of a private practice, not a hospital employed system. And I was a grinder. I was kind of like you were. And I was like, I'm going to get out there. And being an adult reconstruction surgeon, hip and knee replacement surgeon, I knew my target population. So I was going to all the senior centers, and there was probably 6 or 7 in, a 3 to 5 mile radius from where I was stationed in Livonia, Michigan. I would go to the Greek church. I go to the Italian American Club, and I do these seminars. I just educate on hip and knee arthritis and the options for that, direct anterior, minimally invasive. So I was my own kind of billboard. I was just out there talking with people, being very real. I'd go to Panera Bread. I'd sit down. I'd have nobody. And by the end, I'd have 6 to 8 people standing around me, giving them business cards. I'd have models of hips and knees and implants, and kind of just, here's some coffee, just sit down and let's just have a chat. And then it just grew from that. So I completely agree that word of mouth is, because people will trust you, right? Once you gain their trust, that's the key first step.
Yeah. And then, if they have a good experience with you, they're going to, that's that for the person who referred them to you, they're going to like that. And then also they'll tell their friends, or, I give them a magnet when I see them, and hopefully they put it on their fridge, and something happens later on, they give me a call again. So I like the magnet better than the business card. I used to use business cards because like the magnet, business cards sometimes go in a pile and get lost, but the magnet can sit somewhere where usually remains somewhat undisturbed. So that's what I use. But that's kind of what I did. And like I said, there was a lot of failures in the beginning with that stuff, but that's part of the process. So that's okay. But I learned from that. And, and over time, as I got busier, I don't really do too much networking at all anymore. It's more, I'll do meetings, like high yield meetings I'll do for sure. But no, I'm not, going to these networking meetings and, talking to someone who does roofing for an hour. I mean, which is what I used to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if maybe the terminology I'm using wrong, but it kind of sounds like, kind of like grassroots marketing, right? It's kind of like start, 1, 2, 3 patients, and then eventually, you just kind of build and grow. And
Greg, I hate to interrupt. So you went from 2,500 correct?
Yes,
When you were
correct.
kind of at your max of your traditional private practice,
250.
down to 250.
Correct.
And what's your current volume?
400.
Okay, so when you went from 2,500 to 250, was it, this is what I'm doing, first come, first serve? Like sign up and you're going to be one of the 250?
Yeah, did you have like
Yeah.
a threshold?
How'd that
Yep.
work?
No, basically, it was the worst time of my career. So the end of 2017, the last 3 months, where normal high volume internal medicine practice going on, 20 to 25 patients a day, rounds in the hospital, transitioning to MDVIP basically January 1st of 2018. So those 3 months, I was trying to manage a normal practice, high volume practice, but talk to every single patient about MDVIP. Hey, as of December 27th, I'm opening my MDVIP practice. It's a membership-based practice. It's going to be $1,650 a year. It's currently $1,800, but it started at $1,650 a year. This is why I'm doing it. This is the value that you get for this money. This is why I'm doing it. Every single patient I talked to about that. We had a MDVIP helps
What
the
were
transition.
some of the value adds? What were the biggest like bullet points? If you
Yeah,
don't mind
so
just give
for
us-
a patient, the membership fee gets you a much more thorough, detailed annual physical. It's kind of like a executive health physical. So you get extra testing that's included in the fee. Every patient every year gets an EKG, ankle brachial indexes, a hearing screen, a vision screen, body fat composition, grip strength, pulmonary function tests, and a bunch of extra fancy blood work that is not just fancy and bells and whistles, but I think very impactful on cardiovascular health, advanced lipids, advanced inflammation, that sort of stuff. So they get
ApoB?
what's that?
ApoB stuff? I know you're a
ApoB.
big Peter Attia guy.
Listen, wow, Doc,
Yeah, man.
good job. I'm a big
He just
ApoB guy.
he
drive.
just listened to a podcast. He's not that smart,
I've
dude.
been a Peter
Relax.
Tell me
Attia
something
fan
Attia
for
says.
14 years now.
Yeah, Dr. Attia is my hero. So they get that, and then a 90-minute physical with me. So like the normal physical is 30 minutes. You plan 30 minutes. The doctor might be in 15, 20 minutes. Now I'm not missing I'm not missing preventative care. I'm not missing wellness. I'm talking about oral health and sleep and exercise and nutrition, and I have data to back it up. And so the MDVIP.
Each patient, do they want that 90 minutes? Do they use it? Do you
So-
ever like, I'm good now? I'm checking out.
Especially after the first couple of years, I have a lot of patients that I'm in and out in 45 to 55 minutes. The new patients and the patients that have more issues, they're taking 75 to 90 minutes. But yeah, now that I've been doing it 6 years, I mean, most of those are not 90-minute visits anymore. But the other values added from that finance is the membership in this club. So the club gets you usually same day or next day appointments. All of my appointments are 30 minutes. All of my except for the physicals that are 90, so they're all 30-minute instead of 10 or 15-minute visits. Patients have my cell phone for emergency. They know what emergencies are. I've gotten maybe 3 or 4 inappropriate calls in 6 years. They get access to if they're traveling.
Was that Travis Pizzell calling you?
No, he doesn't pay, so it's.
When we first started talking about this, I didn't quite think about the fact that most bankers have to be kind of like used to talking to different industries. You mentioned agriculture. You mentioned, maybe your auto mechanic,
sure.
manufacturer, whatever it may be. And they're probably least educated on the medical side of things.
Absolutely, because it's so strange. And I'd like to tie back to something Travis said. Your father-in-law across the street, right? You said he wouldn't really recognize medicine, understand Dr. Molly's practice today. The same is true with banking, and that's one of the things that we can capitalize on. And part of the challenge that the traditional banks have, and maybe even some of the traditional hospitals, is they are so invested in what they have. So the traditional bank comes into a community and they buy a nice building downtown to put their name up on, and that's where a lot of the business is downtown.
Right.
But then their customers live, and in my case, in Austin, Texas, they moved to Dripping Springs. So the bank has to build branch banks in Dripping Springs, and they have to put full-time employees in, they have to put equipment in there, and they have to put security with it. And then people move to Round Rock. So then they have to have a branch bank in Round Rock. And then they move to where I live, which is in Leander or Cedar Park. And it's a very dated way to do business. The truth is, branch banks don't really provide any relationship. You pull up to the window, you put the deal on the deal, you talk to a speaker, half the time you can't hear, right? and this is something that the big banks right now, they can't get rid of that because they have so much invested in it. And one of the unique things about the medical industry and the medical world is we don't deal and transact in cash. All the money moves electronically and moves on the wire. So what we're able to do is to capitalize off of today's modern technology. And what we hope to create is by being able to take a single small brick and mortar, so you've got your traditional bank, but build off of it a concierge level software that creates the experience like I had in your place today, to where with software today, we can create a scenario where you have a delay in a surgery or something canceled, but you had some banking you need to do. In today's world, you can't leave that hospital because they're prepping the next patient and getting the next deal ready, and you can't drive down to the bank. And most banks open at 9 o'clock in the morning and close at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So how does the traditional physician even bank? And what we can do with software today is create a scenario where you have a personal banker, you have a personal teller. You're not just taking a picture of a check with your phone, but you have that 30-minute break. And it could be something as simple as you guys are looking at a new car, and stuff. You touch a button and you connect to a banker that knows you, knows your business, understands it, understands your revenue, and you can say, hey, look, I've got 30 minutes here, 20 minutes while I'm waiting for a case, but we're looking at a new car. And the banker knows, you say, great, what are you looking at? What model? You tell them. What interest rate are they offering you? You tell them, and they say, okay, we can probably beat that by 0.25% because we don't have all that other overhead, right? And we don't have to say, okay, pull together 2 years of your tax returns, give me all the ownership papers for your deal because we know it, right? So now you, within a matter of 15 or 20 minutes, had the experience of walking into a bank without disrupting your care of your patients or your clinic. This can be done from home in the evening.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big things that we can transition different because the industry's changed, or the technology has changed at a rate with this that the industry can't accept the current status quo.
So you mentioned that you kind of flirted with that. You considered hospital employment at one point. Obviously, your entire career has been private practice. I'm about as staunch as they get. I mean, I have a podcast with my buddy here called Private Practice Podcaster. So you're not going to find somebody that's an advocate more for private practice than myself. What is it with you that has kind of drawn you towards private practice, and what do you think are some of the main advantages, and what has kept you in private practice this long of a time?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like fighting a battle, and it's a little bit unfortunate that it's become that way, but that's just the way it is with practice economics and overheads and reimbursements and the whole 9 yards and staffing issues and everything that, everybody's facing these things now. But I think, the main thing for us is, it's nice to be independent. It's nice to make your own decisions. I think really what's been a lot of fun for us is this whole, transformation that's going on now with this, direct employer contracting with self-insured companies with bundled payments. And that's a really neat opportunity as these, bigger companies that have, thousands of employees all over the country, they can't afford to buy an individual policy for each one of their employees. And so bundled payments is a growing market. And we got started with that quite early and sort of figured out how to manage bundles, how to adjudicate bundles. And it's not easy, but just through platforms like LinkedIn, we've made a phenomenal number of contacts, of people working in this space. We've learned a ton about how insurance companies work, about the differences between how they work when they're a third-party administrator for a self-insured company, versus selling policies to just, average people who are purchasing directly. And it's a very complicated space, but the more you learn about it, the more interesting it gets. And by staying private, it keeps you nimble working in that space, which has really, been a lot of fun. And so I think that's kind of the main thing that gets us out of bed in the morning is trying to be part of this whole transformation that's going on in terms of the way that we deliver care. And so, it's a work in progress, but for us, I think that's going to be the future of our practice. I think we're always going to take care of Medicare patients because we want to provide service to the community, but that's not going to keep our practice alive. And this is what's going to keep it alive. And I think if you work in a big health system, they just have too much administrative overhead to be able to do it in a really cost-effective way, like a private practice can do it.
What's 1% of 18 billion? If they decrease their reps, that's $180 million, if my math is correct.
Yeah.
Just by decreasing commission 1%.
A lot of zeros.
That's a lot of zeros. And so the numbers just become mind-boggling when you think through that. And they're very smart people that run these companies. This is something, Dr. Molly, that you and orthopedic surgeons have been going through for years, is just CMS cut, gradual. And so I do think that these companies are, hey, we can do this. They're not going to get sympathy from their customers.
Stu, I think this is a great segue into this question is being a physician advocate, being a physician partner in a physician-owned surgical hospital. Are there economical, I'm not talking service advantages because I think there's a huge service advantage to medical device brokers, but are there economical advantages to your model versus kind of the classic model out there?
Yeah. There definitely can be. I mean, I can't make a blanket statement because
I don't need specific numbers either, by the way. I don't even want to talk about that. I just meant like generalizations.
But with the market being the market, I mean, there's a very real thing that the market share leaders feel pressure to keep their average selling price at a certain point. And I'll just do, here's another example that I've told a bunch of people in the past is Zimmer's, number one market share in the US in hips and knees. I don't know exactly what it is, but I think it's about 30% market share. There's about 1.5 million joints done a year now, I believe. But to make math easy, let's just say there's only 1 million joints done a year in the US. If they took $1,000 decrease in average selling price across the country
with their 30% market share,
correct, that's a $300 million net profit loss.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're doing everything that they can to keep margins as high as possible, prices as high as possible. There are certain times where they will do that, but that's where marketing comes in. The smaller companies a lot of times will be more flexible because they're looking to grow their business. And again, every company is going to ultimately set a floor price for me because it's their company. I'm bringing to the table, I'm bringing options. And if I was talking to you, I would say, okay, this is what company A could do, company B could do, and company C could do. And obviously much more goes into the just price. You mentioned that before, but it is a consideration.
And to me, it's like different people feel it requires something different for them to kind of feel that sense of appreciation or value, right?
Yep.
And it's the same thing with like different people feel loved different ways, whether it's physical touch, acts of service.
That would not go well.
No. But I'm just saying, like acts of service, words of affirmation, whatever it may be. I feel like it may be a little tricky, but important to understand each of your employees.
What motivates them.
Yeah, right. And how their brain works and how they tick, because you can't treat position A the same as position B and B like C, because their brains are wired differently.
Yeah.
And saying you're super important, you're great, we love you, this and that may resonate unbelievably with employee A, but B, they already think that about themselves and they need something a little bit differently. How do you attack that?
Yeah. So a process that we suggest people use is when we see or we witness the behavior that we want, typically it gets ignored. That's bad, because then what we're doing is we ignore them when they're doing what we want, and then we only call out when they do what we don't want. So that's not a super effective way to drive behavior change. We want to call out the good things, and then we want to explain why it matters to the entire organization, and then we want to explain why it matters to me. So if I go, Travis, when you did this thing, man, you set us up to absolutely crush Q1, and that's going to impact every person in this organization. And it's really important to me because I saw how much you care about getting this goal done, and that just means a lot. That speaks to all the love languages, because what we're doing is we're reinforcing you're part of the tribe. There is no danger of you getting ostracized, and it's that communication. And there's some people love pats on the back. Some people don't need it. Everyone likes the why. If you just go like, hey man, good job. Some people, that's great. A lot of people are like, yeah, whatever. I was going to, I don't need that crap. But if you go, look, good job. Here's why it matters. Everyone likes that.
To me, one of the biggest questions that I would first ask if I was in your shoes is like, what's your ideal retirement age, right? Because everybody assumes from just like the general population that it's 65, but what is it for physicians? What's the most common answer you get? Is it 50? Is it 65? Is it 70?
I think, which is kind of not really surprising, I shouldn't think, but a lot of people never retire. They may cut back in their practice. They may bring on a younger physician. They may start working with their real estate investments, but they don't really retire as the way we remember retirement. When you're, hit age 65, you get your gold watch and you go off and play golf. People are still involved somehow. So we have a lot of physicians still practicing in their late 70s, early 80s. And now what we're helping them with is how to deal with some of the surprises that they now have later in life, like required minimum distributions. So they spent their career, and this is where we help the younger folks when they're first starting out, is you start to tax defer a lot of money today. But really what you're doing is kicking the can down the road, because someday you're going to have to pay the tax when you take distribution. And when you get to a certain age, 73, soon to go to 75, the government says, look, you've got all this money tax sheltered. You've had it for a number of years. We're going to require you to take minimum distributions, whether you need the money or not. So how do you plan around that? And one thing people need to deal with in retirement is what is AGI, adjusted gross income, because their adjusted gross income in retirement is going to impact how much they pay for Medicare. If you go to Medicare.gov and you look at a chart there, the more money you make, the more they take on your Medicare insurance. Social Security, the more you make, the higher the tax on your Social Security. And then required minimum distributions. So we help people plan from the beginning all the way through retirement. So we have a number of physicians in retirement, and we're helping them, manage their cash flow and manage their benefits and so forth.
Yeah, the reason why you need to write a book, it's going to be a little contrarian. The best reason to write a book is it will force you / challenge you to define how you're unique, how you're solving problems in a way that the day-to-day conversations / LinkedIn world does not force you and I to be unique. And the process, especially the written process, the process of taking what's here, having the standard of this cannot be the 17th layer of the same branding stuff that everybody else is doing, or this must be rooted in the dynamics of private practice meets private equity, all the dynamics that are impacting you guys as specialty surgeons. We wrote the book for specialty surgeons, and that was a good choice. With all due respect, we didn't write it for anybody outside of that specialty surgeon track. And so what that means is we'll sell less books, but we had an opportunity to go deep and far into the guidance that we give that matters to the dynamics of you being an orthopedic surgeon or a neurospine guy or a foot and ankle, what have you. So yeah,
I'm curious. Like, were you actually writing?
It's been a fun process.
Like handwriting stuff, typing stuff. Like, how does that even? I'm picturing. You mentioned Fletch earlier, right? Well, I'm thinking of Funny Farm when he goes and he starts writing his book, and he gets distracted here and there. And I just remember going to school for as many years as I did. I'd start to write a paper, and I'd find 1,000,001 reasons to stop writing that paper until it was due the next day, and then I'd sit down and write my 25-page paper. So did you set parameters? Were you guys typing stuff so that you could share it back and forth? How did all that work?
We used a project management software called Basecamp, and Basecamp allowed us to have a centralized headquarter that took the conversation out of email or Google Docs or whatever, meaning I'd log in at dark 30 in the morning. Scott Sigmund would log in at whatever time, and whatever updates, it had real-time updates. So what was great for Scott and I is, he and I, we learned we have different flow patterns. So he's a night owl, and I'm like an Amish farmer. If it's 9 p.m., with the exception of Friday, I'm headed to the bunk. But I'm standing tall at 4:07 a.m. And so we worked really, really well on that. And what he excelled at was first draft, his ability to slay unnecessary words, which is part of the talent of this, right? Meaning, I'm a branding guy. It would make sense that that I would have paragraphs that could be could allow him to kind of weigh in on, and it was a really great process. And then he and I along the way we would meet in person and all that. But here's the interesting thing, Dr. Molly. In that bar, in the thriving metropolis of Springdale, Arkansas, everything that he and I planned on has come true.
Wow.
I love it.
As a disclaimer, this podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professional from any such conditions.